Okay, let's start tonight's wine talk. I'll do a brief introduction as before, and then I'll pass on to Janet. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Anota Mandarin Wine Club again. And Anota Mandarin Wine Club webinars are co-hosted by Cambridge China Centre, the Confucius Institute for Business London, Wine Peak, and CEPD, fortnightly on Sundays with our wine speaker, Jenny Wang, author of The Chinese Wine Renaissance. I'm Jinzhao Li, Director of Cambridge China Centre. And in less than a week's time, next Friday, the 12th February, will be Chinese New Year's Day. And 2021 is the year of ox. We wish everybody a healthy, happy, and very bullish Chinese New Year. And the webinar today is the Chinese New Year special. Janet will talk about famous Chinese cuisines and some wine pairing tips. We are very happy to see so many friends joining us today. And the audience are muted for the time being, but we will activate everybody's audio and video at the later part of the webinar so we can carry on drinking and chatting. Now let's welcome Jenny Wang and hope you all enjoy the wine talk today. Janet.
Thank you, Jinzhao. Good evening, everybody. And yes, let's count down to Chinese New Year. And I, for one, is definitely up for ringing in the new year again. So today we're going to talk about Chinese feasting and wine pairing. So hopefully it will set you up nicely for next week if you are planning a family banquet. So famous Chinese cuisines and wine matching today. And we're going to drink this particular wine today from this mixed case that we're offering at the moment through the Cambridge China Centre. It's a Riesling from Ningxia province. The reason why I picked Riesling is because Riesling is considered to be the most classic, I suppose, the most go-to type of wine for Chinese cuisine. So when people say what wine goes with Chinese cuisine, people tend to say, well, Riesling seems to be an all-rounder. And the reason is Riesling tend to have good acidity. If you watched our previous season, we talked about food and wine matching in terms of flavor profiles and wine character. So typically when the wine has good acidity and freshness, it can cut through the grease of the food. And because Chinese food, especially the ones you get in the UK, for example, tend to be quite rich, right? Quite heavy. And so Riesling, a clean, fresh profile from the wine would cut through the grease and balance the wine. So Riesling tend to be a good choice for Chinese food. The other thing is Riesling have a range of possibilities. It can be bone dry to sweet, right? So on that scale, you can also find a Riesling profile that could go with Chinese food. So it's more versatile. And also Riesling tend to be slightly lower in alcohol. And sometimes the Chinese food we get in the UK that's popular, for example, Sichuan cuisine, it's quite spicy. So you don't want a really alcoholic wine to go with very spicy food either. So in general, you will tend to hear people say, well, try Riesling with Chinese food. And that's why today, since we're talking about Chinese food and wine, let's try this wine together. And we'll see, of course, many other possibilities later in the talk. But you will see that Riesling does pop back quite a bit as well. So Lei Si Ling is what we're tasting. And maybe we can have a chat about this particular one later. And Canaan Winery is actually very interesting. Canaan Winery is run by a lady called Wang Fang. Wang Fang is in English-speaking realms. She's known as Crazy Fang because she was the woman who planted Riesling first in Ningxia. And as you may know, Chinese wineries used to plant a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon because the red Bordeaux blend was sort of the aspirational wine to produce, right? So this lady, Wang Fang, she studied in Germany and fell in love with Riesling, and therefore she tried to experiment with Riesling as a variety in Ningxia, and she achieved great success with actually this wine. This was a internationally award-winning Riesling that really put the grape variety on the map, as it were, for Ningxia and also actually for China. So now you can see more Riesling being produced in Ningxia and also in many other regions across China, and to a large part thanks to Cannon Winery and thanks to Crazy Fang, as she's known. Okay, so let's get on with famous Chinese cuisine, 中国名菜, and wine matching, 美酒搭配, right? So we are often sort of confounded by this issue, which is that in a Chinese banquet setting, you have lots of dishes all served at once, right? There seems to be a lot of choices in terms of where to put down your chopsticks next, right? So this poses a huge problem for matching wine with Chinese food, because unlike in Western cuisine where each course is served with one wine, so you have a main dish, maybe a few sides, but ultimately it's one dish with one wine, so it makes wine pairing a little bit easier. But with a Chinese banquet setting, this is quite difficult, right? So that's why many people find the premise of Chinese food and wine matching to be a very daunting one, almost, question whether there's any point in the exercise, right? I mean, we can break down the problem a little bit, and it could be quite fun. So the way I would suggest that we look at this challenge is to say, actually, although there seems to be a lot of dishes on the table, there are some kind of order. They tend to be some kind of order in how the dishes are served, right? And increasingly more restaurants, Chinese restaurants, especially where they are more aware of this wine and food matching concept, the restaurant will now also serve food in waves of similar characters, for example. So we would call it 一波菜, right? A wave. 一波一波的上菜 means let's serve the dishes in waves rather than randomly all at once. So if you think about the waves of food that we do get in a banquet setting, we often first have appetizers, right? 前菜, or cold dishes, 凉菜. Or sometimes in Chinese, we have this particular set of dishes called 下酒菜. 下酒菜 literally means dishes to down wine, right? So all these are rather appetizing and moreish. And, some of these pictures I've got here, for example, pickled cucumber with pork head meat and a type of cold beef and a type of jellied pork tripe, right? So all these tend to be cold dishes and very moreish, very appetizing. So actually, in fact, a nice dry Riesling, crisp, fresh Riesling would go very well with such dishes, because the freshness, the bright acidity in a Riesling like this is also very moreish. It's mouth-watering, because acidity actually literally makes your mouth water and makes you want to drink more and have more of these appetizers, right? So in this scenario, this Riesling we've got here would be perfect for these appetizers and cold dishes, right? So what might follow the appetizers might be a specialty dish. So for example, since we're talking about Chinese New Year, let's talk about dumplings, right? Because dumplings would be a specialty dish, right, for Chinese New Year banquet setting. And dumplings come in many forms, right? So in the most part of China, for Chinese New Year in particular, we tend to have 水饺, which is boiled dumpling. But in fact, we can also find 煎饺, slightly fried. It's a bit like gyoza. We have steamed dumplings, 蒸饺, or 水晶饺, which is more in the Canton region, especially in dim sum. You will find these rice flour based, clear, almost clear, very thin, sort of skinned, steamed dim sum dumplings, right? So dumplings would come in many forms. And for me, actually, I find a sparkling wine, for example, the sparkling Chinese wine we had last year would go quite nicely with various dumplings, because for starters, sparkling wine is festive. And when we have dumplings, it tend to be also festive, right? So in terms of matching the mood, they go quite nicely together. But more than that, the bubbles in the sparkling wine gives you a fresh and burst of a flavor and aroma. And that, again, is very appetizing and whets your appetite to eat the dumplings, right? And both of these are fairly light in weight as well. So sparkling wine tends to give you a feeling of elegance and delicacy, right? And dumplings is not a very heavy dish, right? It's quite light in texture, and you can have quite a lot of them, in one go. So in terms of the body and the weight, they are also fairly well matched. And of course, specialty dishes, again, Beijing 烤鸭, Peking duck is another very famous and popular special dish, right? 特色菜. With Peking duck, there are lots of different ways to match Peking duck with wine. But let's just go through some of the wines that we have been introducing to you guys through the wine club. So a classic pairing would be Pinot Noir, right? Pinot Noir and roast duck is quite a classic pairing. So, for example, the Rongzi Pinot Noir we had in our previous mixed case from Shanxi would be quite a lovely match, because it's quite fruity. The aromatics and the fruitiness would go quite well with the fruitiness of the Peking duck, in terms of the way it's smoked sometimes on wood. So it gives it a bit of smokiness and sweetness, and of course the plum sauce, right? So that fruitiness would go very well with a Peking duck. But if you're talking about Chinese wine with a bit more character, Chinese character, actually this Marcelan blend that we've tried from Xinjiang province would also be a great contender for Peking duck. Again, it's fruity, it's soft, it's light in tannins, so would work equally well with a Peking duck. And how about Cabernet Garnished? This Cabernet Garnished, I find, works rather nicely with the it picks out the smokiness in the duck, right? So because Peking duck is usually smoked over peach wood or some kind of wood, and the Cabernet Garnished by Martin Winery is oak aged for 10 months, right? So it has just the right amount of smokiness also to pick out the smokiness in the duck. So again, I think that's a rather lovely pairing as well. But how about a Merlot, right? Merlot, fruity, round, smooth Merlot is also a classic pairing for duck dishes, right? So again, that would work pretty well. And a Syrah, maybe from Shandong province, which we've tried last year. It has a rather nice dark blackberry dimension, which again goes well with the plum sauce, right? Plum is also a dark fruit, stone fruit. So it picks out the fruitiness of the wine. And also there's a bit of pepperiness in this particular Syrah, which again complements rather nicely with the savory dimension of the duck, right? So these are just the red wine pairings. And arguably Peking duck will equally go rather nicely with some white wines, not least maybe the Riesling, right? So there are actually no one way of matching food. I hope this shows you that food and wine matching is really fun. It's almost a game, as long as you can think of reasons that something might work and you are willing to experiment, it's absolutely sort of an open playing field for us. There's no definitive ways of pairing a particular dish to a particular grape or a particular wine, right? So I would suggest, if you have the chance, maybe try them all with a Peking duck or some specialty dish and see which one you find the most affinity with. So apart from, these appetizers and specialty dishes, when we come to the sort of the main dishes, the loose dishes, then we should consider other factors, such as what are the main ingredients. So although, sometimes we have lots of fish and meat and vegetables all mixed together, but we tend to go for one particular cuisine style, right? So maybe we're going for Cantonese style cuisine, or we're going for Shandong cuisine, or we're going for Sichuan cuisine, right? So each of those cuisine styles would have an overarching theme or cooking method or special ingredients, right? So the sauces, the texture, the cooking method, and the regional cuisine style are things to help you with choosing a wine. So sometimes when the dishes seems quite random, but if you pick out a particular theme or style that runs through the banquet, then it probably is sufficient to just match a wine to that overarching style, right? So, for example, let's have a look at some regional cuisines, right? So if we're talking about regional cuisines, you probably know the 8 main regional cuisines of China, which are in the darker shades of gray here. And let's take an example, which is actually, okay, so one way of looking at the regional cuisine is looking at the different provinces. But I think it's also quite fun to look at it geographically, especially overlaying it on top of wine regions, right? So over here, it's a very rough overview of the styles of flavors in different parts of China. And also, Beijing is where the famous Peking duck comes from. And around the coast, you have, obviously, unsurprisingly, good seafood, right? In the north, Xinjiang, Ningxia, Gansu, Shanxi, that sort of area, and also they are also key wine regions. They eat a lot of lamb, right? So that's interesting when we talk about food and wine matching. A lot of the wines tend to have affinity with lamb dishes in those regions. But of course, everywhere in China, pork is the most consumed meat everywhere, right? So that's another way of looking at these geographical split. But I want to use an example of Shandong cuisine to highlight some of the points I was talking about in terms of picking wines to go with the style. So Shandong Lu cuisine is arguably the first original cuisine style of China. So it's certainly the oldest cuisine style, having over 2,500 years of history in China. It was tightly related to the Confucian school coming into being from Shandong region. As you may know, Confucius is from Shandong, right? And the Confucian school is all about making things with a ritualistic aspect. It's all about decorum. So Shandong cuisine due to this Confucian influence, became the first cooking style that was elevated to an art, right? To incorporate art, science, philosophy, and it's the first cuisine to be worthy of gracing a banquet or a state or a formal occasion, right? So, 鲁菜 is a very influential out of all of the cuisine styles in China. So I would like to use 鲁菜 today as a main example. So for example, 鲁菜, actually there are many, many different cooking methods. I just want to highlight one thing, which is what may be loosely translated into English as braise, right? Braising or braised. So here you have braised seafood, braised pork belly, braised tofu, braised chicken. But actually, this word braise in English, in Chinese, could be a number of cooking methods, right? It could be 红烧, it could be 焗焖, it could be 炖, right? It could be quite a few different, subtly different ways of cooking. So if we're gonna look at just picking out the braising style of cooking method, so dishes from this type of style tend to be quite rich and decadent without being greasy, right? So Lu cuisine is all about balance. So it needs to be decadent, rich, but not greasy, not oily, right? Lu cuisine is famous for having devised the concept of umami, so 咸鲜, right? So savory umami is also a key character of Lu cuisine, right? So if you have this umami and fairly rounded, full-bodied in a way, in terms of the weight of the dishes, then what you would like is also maybe a wine that's at least medium to full-bodied, quite fruity, with a bit of savory dimensions. And happily, Cabernet Grenache, as you've heard me say many, many times, 蛇龙珠, was the first grape European variety that was introduced to the modern Chinese wine industry into Shandong province in 1896 by the Changyu winery, right? So 蛇龙珠, essentially, its first home in China was in Shandong, right? So I think this is a perfect example of a wine that is kind of local to China, that actually goes extremely well with the local cuisine style, right? So 蛇龙珠 and Lu cuisine, especially this type of braised dishes, tend to work very well together. So that's just another reminder of what Cabernet Grenache is. You've probably heard me say this many times, so I won't go through it again. But yes, so it was first introduced to China into Shandong province. And how about the other big wine regions like Xinjiang and Ningxia? As you know, they eat a lot of lamb. Sorry about this contrast. So a cute sheep and a whole barbecued lamb. You know, that's a famous dish in both Xinjiang and Ningxia, and they would always argue whose version is the more superior. So if we're talking about grilled lamb, 烤羊肉, right? 羊肉串, right? So a Marselan or a Cabernet Sauvignon blend from Xinjiang province or Ningxia province would go very, very well with these dishes, because all of these wines, so for example, the Marselan, fruity, fine tannins, and the fact that it also have a slightly herbaceous dimension, peppery dimension, especially in the actually more so in Ningxia, in the Cabernet Sauvignons of Ningxia, that peppery spiciness is almost like the condiment that you would apply to 烤羊肉 and 羊肉串. So they tend to find great affinity with each other. Marcelan, just a quick reminder, a French variety that's finding great expressions in China. And so whenever possible, I would like to see if a Marcelan, especially from Xinjiang province or Hebei province or Ningxia province, will go with the local cuisine. And Ningxia, again, if we look at besides lamb dishes, right? Ningxia, because it's very close to the Yellow River. Another famous dish from Ningxia is the Yellow River carp, right? Ningxia Hongshao Huanghe Liyu, right? That's a famous dish as well. So again, some local Ningxia wines would go very nicely with it. So familiar Riesling, and also this Cabernet Sauvignon, the Blanc de Blanc. Both lovely white wines which have great minerality and savoriness, which goes quite well with seafood dishes. You know, it has a salinity, a slight saltiness to it. I'm talking about the Cabernet Blanc de Blanc, which hopefully we'll taste quite soon in one of the following sessions. So that savory dimension and the freshness, the acidity tend to go quite well with seafood. But as you can see, this particular seafood dish is quite rich in sauce, right? So by no means you always have to have white wine with fish. It's not really true. It depends on how the fish is cooked. So for example, this fish dish would go equally well with the Ningxia Merlot that we've got in our mixed case as well. This is a particularly smooth and fruity Merlot, and it would go rather nicely with this Hongshao way of cooking, right? Hongshao is tend to give the dish a richness and a bit of fruitiness as well. So by no means do you always have to have white wines with fish. So all these three wines are from Ningxia. So again, trying to match local wines with a local delicacy. And if you remember when we talked about Hebei, so Ji, right? Ji Cai, Ji cuisine from Hebei province, we mentioned that, you know, around the Hebei wine region, there's a large reservoir with freshwater prawns, right? So a famous local dish, I mentioned this last time, is a lightly battered prawns seasoned with salt and pepper, so 椒盐炸虾, and it goes very, very well with longyan, which is a local grape that especially thrives in Hebei province and is made into a white wine, right? So that again is a really good match because longyan again has a savory dimension. Quite a lot of Chinese wines tend to display this savory dimension, which is very food friendly, especially with Chinese food. But equally, this longyan wine would go well with similar shellfish dishes. You know, other popular shellfish dishes like 焗小龙虾, which is a sort of, we call it little lobster, but I guess it's a type of langoustine or something. So that would go equally well with the longyan, or something even lighter in style, such as 清炒虾仁, right? So this is a lightly stir-fried prawns, right? So all these dishes would go rather well with a nice, refreshing glass of longyan. So longyan dragon eye, just a quick reminder that it's not a fruit. It's a type of grape that has been growing in China for over 800 years, and is now, well, it's a grape for eating as well. It's a table grape as well. But now recently, people have found ways to make rather fine quality wines with it as well, notably in Hebei province. So just quickly, other types of local wines for local food. We show the Pinot Noir from Shanxi province, right? Shanxi province, as we said, is Loess Plateau terroir. So the wines also display really good freshness and acidity. because of the local soil profile. So the Pinot Noir from Shanxi province has this lovely freshness and fruitiness. It's delicate and elegant. It's fruity, but it also retains brightness and acidity. And that particular wine would go rather well with the local 油面. 油面. It's almost like a pasta dish, I guess. You can almost imagine it's kind of a type of bolognese pasta dish, right? So the sauce is tomato based. So tomato again has umami dimensions, has a bit of herbaceousness and greenness. So it needs a wine that has some freshness to it as well to match. And okay, so going away from the wine regions. So previously we tried to talk about wine regions and how to match their local wine to some famous local dishes. But let's also look at some well-known cuisine types, but not necessarily a wine region, such as the Canton region, right? Guangdong. And we talk about Yue Cai. So Yue Cai is very popular and familiar, especially in the UK, right? Because most of the restaurants and takeaways traditionally have been Cantonese style restaurants and takeaways. So particularly in the UK, in the US, in fact, anywhere outside of China, most people's first encounter with Chinese food tend to be Cantonese style, right? I want to especially talk about Cantonese dim sum, right? Because again, dim sum can tend to be, there are lots of varieties, and you can have steamed, you can have fried little bites, and the flavors can be quite varied. So it seems to be fairly tricky to pair with wine. What I tend to suggest is, again, to go with sparkling wine. Yeah, because sparkling wine, again, offers freshness, zinginess, and a slightly light mouthfeel, right? Because of the bubbles. And because the dim sum tend to be small bites and not so heavy. So it kind of matches with the sparkly mouthfeel of the wine. Or I would say a rosé would work quite well as well with dim sum. Rosé again is light and a bit fruity, tend not to be very alcoholic, tend to be quite easygoing and easy to pair with dishes when you have quite a lot going on. So in general, I think sparkling wine and rosé go quite nicely with dim sum in particular. But if you're talking about cooked dishes in Cantonese cuisine, again, the previous rules still apply. For example, char siu, which is a type of roast pork, because of its slight sweetness and fruitiness, I would say maybe a merlot would go very nicely with char siu. So the same rules are still apply when you're talking about different cuisine types. And then, of course, we have to talk about Sichuan cuisine, right? Chuan Cai. Chuan Cai is gaining popularity in the last decade or so in the UK because we all like to challenge each other to a chili contest, don't we? So everyone wants to be braver than the next person, and Chuan Cai is very much about this ma la dimension, which is a numbing heat, right? Numbing spiciness. So what would go, or what could counter or balance out the spiciness? So usually this is where Riesling is again mentioned a lot. And actually maybe an off-dry, which is like slightly sweet Riesling, might work even better in this scenario, because sweetness counterbalance spiciness. So both acidity and sweetness are good to balance acidity. And in fact, I would go as far as to say, why not try a cold ice wine? You want something cold when you're eating numbing spice. And again, the sweetness will mellow down the spiciness. And both Riesling and sweet wines tend to be low in alcohol as well. So that also helps to temper it down a little bit, right? So those are a very quick whiz through some of the main cuisine types and regions. So one little thing I want to mention is that, it's all very well we talk about this wines, Chinese wines in particular, with Chinese food. But what I would really dearly love to see is that in the future we can have more opportunities at Chinese restaurants to experience these wine and food pairing, right? So really we need to sort of get the restaurant behind this. And I hope, next time you go to a Chinese restaurant, actually ask them, do you have Chinese wine? And why not? It's about time, that we go to a Chinese restaurant, and we should be able to drink a nice glass of Chinese wine, a good quality Chinese wine, and preferably one that has being nicely designed around the menu or the speciality of the restaurant, right? So hopefully that is something we will start to see. But I think for us as restaurant goers, we should ask those questions and hopefully push the restaurateurs along a little bit to get Chinese wines into Chinese restaurants. And I think that would be very exciting because there are excellent Chinese wines out there. We need more opportunities to try them, right? So that's kind of what I'm hoping to see soon. Okay, and as a little special bonus, so every year around this time, people ask me, so what is a zodiac wine that we should be drinking this year? And it's been difficult because the year of the dog or pig or rat, it's difficult to find wine labels with a rat on it, for example. So it hasn't been an easy question to answer. Although in China, many wineries, some very top quality wineries are now launching zodiac wines every year now, and they are beautiful. The labels are really beautiful. But those wines we can't get over here abroad, right? Outside of China, we just don't really have access to them. And also those wines tend to be quite sort of lighthearted. They don't tend to be the top wine of the winery. They tend to be crowd pleasing, easy and early drinking wines, right? So this year of the ox, I'm very excited that I have come across a great wine that actually says ox on the label, and it's a serious wine. But it's from Australia. It's a Barossa Valley, which many of you may know is one of the most famous regions in Australia, and they're very famous for Shiraz, which is basically Syrah, but in the New World, places like Australia, New Zealand, they tend to refer it to as Shiraz. And Shiraz now also tend to imply a style of wine that's typical of the New World. So New World Shiraz tend to be more bolder, rounder, with more oak influence. So versus the European, French Syrah, which might be slightly lighter in style, right? So Shiraz, if you want to try one of the top estate from this region, that's very typical of the style, right? So St. Helens is really at the top of making this style of wine, Shiraz-based wine, and they are now focusing only on Shiraz as well. So it's called the Mighty Ox, and I think it's a brilliant wine to drink for the year of the ox. And this year, because the ox is a magnificent, noble animal, I can hands on heart say I have found a really decent wine that's also in line with the Chinese New Year theme as well. And this wine only comes in magnums. So definitely don't drink it alone. It's a wine to share for banquet. It comes in magnums, which means it's twice the size of a normal bottle, right? And I think it would go rather nicely with hot pot, 火锅. So 火锅 is interesting because 火锅 is hot and hearty and sort of rustic in a way, but it's also quite light in texture. This is the only instance where I think, although the texture of the soup is light, you can get away with drinking a rather bold and big and full-bodied wine. Just because the hot pot, the feeling of eating a hot pot is that you want to be sort of surrounded by coziness. You want a full-bodied experience because hot pot is very wholesome. So and also because the soup itself is not very substantial, the wine being a more full-bodied wine almost complements and supplements the hot pot experience. Right. Or I would say, a full-bodied, fruity, oaky Shiraz would pair very well with what we call 大鱼大肉, which means big fish, big meat, i.e. Feasting food, meaty dishes or fish cooked in rather rich sauces, so all these very impressive banquet feasting type of food. 大鱼大肉. So I would say if you're gonna go try a bottle of the Mighty Ox, they would go very well with the sort of feasting, banqueting type of food we will be eating around Chinese New Year as well. Right. So with that, okay, so yeah, Mighty Ox is available from Harvey Nichols. I'm not getting any commission, by the way, for saying any of this. It's just I generally this year I've managed to find a Zodiac wine, and that is also a very good wine, and is a very top example of its region and its varietal style. So I think it's worth trying. So. There you go. And if you want to read more about the food and wine matching, that's the page reference in my book. Okay, so with that, I'm going to open the floor, I suppose, and we can have a chat about what you're drinking, what you might be drinking next week, and what you might be eating. And we'll see you after February, after the Chinese New Year, and talk about the Chinese wine industry and what that reflects about modern China. That's for next time. And just a quick reminder, if you're interested in trying any of the wines that I mentioned, the current mixed case is available through the Cambridge China Center website. So, feel free to check it out from the website. Hopefully more of us can taste and comment on the wines. Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janet. I'm just now trying to open up people's audio and video so we can chat about the wines we mentioned and also the Chinese cuisines, which made me mouth watering. Okay, and you're welcome to open your video and audio to join in the chat, or if you have any questions. Yeah.
What do you want me to do?
There's Bob.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
I'm very well.
Excellent.
I must just say, I enjoyed you on Sunday brunch this morning.
Oh, thank you.
As well. It was very interesting.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I thought the food looked quite nice. I actually felt quite hungry after doing this.
The food tonight looks very good.
Yeah. Looking at the food, thinking, it's lunchtime for sure.
Yes. But it was very good because this morning you showed an English wine, an English Pinot Noir, and you introduced the similarities between. I think there are similarities between making wine in England and in China.
Absolutely. I'm also beginning to find that a very interesting subject to compare the two wine industries and finding similarities, but of course many differences too. But Pinot Noir in particular is interesting because that Pinot Noir, this one is in the mixed case right now that we're offering, because in our mixed case we have two English wines and 4 Chinese wines this time. So this Bonny Pinot Noir is in our mixed case, and it's also the one I showed today on Sunday brunch. Actually, it was funny. It was actually for this webinar that I discovered the wine pairing for this morning's item on Sunday brunch, because I was drinking this wine in preparation for our webinar, for this webinar when we were choosing the wines, and I was having siu mai. I was having that dish for dinner. And it just struck me that the sauce, that Red Dragon sauce, was just incredible with this Pinot Noir, and it was a surprise. So I thought I need to put it in. It was very nice, and just shows wine and food matching. It's just a bit of fun, really. And there are no rules, really. Whatever works is fine.
The other similarity was the challenge of making wine in England and China. They're both relatively expensive places to make wine. They're quite labour intensive. In England, the climate is difficult, and that you have to be very selective with the grapes.
Yes.
So the wine tends to be expensive, and it's the same as you've pointed out before in China. Yes. Because of the need to bury the vines, it's very labour intensive. So the challenges are similar, and both must be aiming to make quality wine because they've got to charge a reasonable price for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, spot on there about the price challenges for both countries. Yeah. And I guess in the UK, at least you have the home crowd advantage, right? So people may want to support the English wine industries, and maybe they'll pay a few more pounds for it. There's a bit of that, which helps. But for Chinese wines, it's a bit more tricky. So we have to tell a much more interesting, compelling story in a way. Yeah.
Well,
so
you're telling that anyway.
Well, thank you. I hope so. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, hello. Hi, Hugh. Hi, Duncan. Hi, Hugh. How are you? Great to have you today.
So Janet, I'm actually drinking the Rongsa Pinot Noir this evening that you're recommended.
That's from our last case.
Yeah, which I bought some more bottles of, and I must say it's a very impressive wine. And I know that I watched you on the Sunday brunch when you were showing the English wine, but I think that the Rongsa is very good. My question is, and maybe it's just a comment rather than a question, that when I've been to China. And I've been to these kind of formal banquets. You say there's a wave of cuisine. I mean, I would describe it more as a blizzard, that you get so many different dishes, which can be a mixture of fish and meat and vegetables. I know that if you go to Sichuan, you tend to start off with cold dishes which are not so spicy, and then cold dishes which are a bit spicier, and then hotter dishes, and then hot spicy dishes at the end. But elsewhere you end up with such a variety of dishes that drinking wine is actually quite difficult, because you've got a mixture of meat and fish and vegetables and sweet and salty and sour, which is all wonderful, but it's very difficult to choose a wine, I think.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. it's actually very challenging to pick, especially if you're just picking one wine for a whole entire Chinese banquet. It's really difficult. And that's why I tend to say, it's better to not to get bogged down with the whether it's fish or it's meat or it's chicken or pork. It's better to look at the source, what's the overriding theme there. If it's Sichuan, you're going to get dried chilies and peppers and stuff like that. And that kind of is the overwhelming thing, and therefore you want maybe a very fresh Riesling just to counter all of that. And if you're talking about the Shandong Lu cuisine, over there you have xian is a huge theme in Lu cuisine, so umami, savoriness, that sort of seafood flavor. So you want something that's good with umami as a undertone, right? So I think it's more about the underlying flavor. With Cantonese cuisine tend to be a little bit of sweetness underpinning the savoriness, right? That's generally how Cantonese cuisine work. So if you understand the cuisine style, it's a little bit easier. And also Fuxia Dunlop mentioned, I think it's a really great point she made, which was, actually when you are attending a Chinese banquet, just embrace the fact that there are this explosion of different flavors, and it's up to you when you want to take a sip of wine. It's not like with every bite of food you must have a sip of wine either. It's like, when you encountered the right flavor profile for your wine, that's when you should have a sip of wine. So I think that's a perfectly practical point to make, which is, sometimes just don't expect to have a sip of wine with every single a bite, because some of the flavors just will not work for that particular wine. Yeah. So picking when to have that sip is also the art.
That maybe provides a bit of structure. I do remember one Chinese dinner I went to, which was actually in the north of China, north of Beijing, where I seem to remember that they served beer, tea, and an Australian Shiraz, and also cognac. And one was encouraged to mix them all. I mean, not in the same glass, but a sip of cognac with something, followed by a mouthful of beer with something else, and then tea with some other dishes. And this wasn't really something which I was used to, but apart from the, I must say, slight headache the following day, it was quite a pleasurable experience.
Oh dear. Yeah. I can imagine that sort of thing. Yeah. Offering different choices, and it's up to you to choose which sip to have with which bite. It's up to you to do that.
Yeah. In China, many occasions people drink beer or even spirits. Very strong. So you do lots of dishes to down the spirits.
Yeah. So the cognac, actually, I'm not surprised by that served with the main meal. Yeah, because we do drink spirits with food.
How are you, Hugh, in Portugal?
Very good in Portugal. Working hard on the vines, pruning like mad.
Excellent. Is it going well, Hugh?
Not too bad. We just developed a wheelbarrow with the fire on it. So we moved the wheelbarrow on fire beside the vines, and we cut into the wheelbarrow, which has got a big drum in it, and it's burning the vine tops to reduce any mildew problems later on. And it also keeps us warm and frightens the sandflies.
Oh, wonderful.
I think very good. Very good.
So we're up on the terraces on the Tauriga Nacional.
Fantastic. That's very interesting. It's always interesting to hear how winemakers are, what they're up to in this particular time of year, isn't it? Yeah.
It's wet. We've got a lot of rain during tomorrow. Probably 30 to 40 millimeters, and we've had a tremendous amount of rain the last couple of weeks. It makes it hard cutting vines, I tell you.
All right. Yeah. It's very important that all the work you do now, isn't it, to sort of give it the best start.
It is. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, good luck. We'll keep our fingers crossed for you.
Yes.
The Riesling is very good as well. Yeah, I like the Riesling.
That's good. I'm glad you're liking it. I have to say, this wine for me, actually, I drank it over a few days. It actually improved in my view. It didn't deteriorate after a few days. For me, actually, still kept on opening up a bit more. So yeah, I'm glad you like it.
Yeah, it's really good.
Okay.
It was also very good of you to mention St. Hallett.
Yeah,
because that was the first vineyard I went to in Australia.
Right. Yeah, it's such
I met the winemaker and grower and I had lunch with him, so that's got a soft place in my heart.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's such a wonderful estate, and they do, if you're talking about Shiraz from Barossa, it's Hallett, isn't it? And I was just like, finally this year I can actually recommend an ox-themed wine to people, because last year was almost impossible, rat. I'm trying to find a label with a rat on it. It's not very easy. But yeah, the mighty ox, I think. Yeah, definitely.
And Janet, Leanne is asking in the chat box, can we buy ox wine in the UK from the website you mentioned?
Well, it's Harvey Nichols, isn't it?
It's Harvey Nichols. Yeah, it's at Harvey Nichols.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, because I'm not really selling wine. It's just a recommendation. Yes, they're not giving me any commission on that. But yeah, you can get it from Harvey Nichols. Yeah. Let's have a look at these comments. Great. Any more questions in the chat box?
Hello, Jenny.
Hello.
I was told you are from Shandong province. So will you share with us what you are going to have? For example, eat and drink on Friday or Thursday, the Chinese New Year Eve.
Right. So my ancestral origin, I suppose, is Shandong. So usually, to be honest, like with Chinese New Year, we do what most families do, which is have dumplings. I think that's that's what everybody does. So we're definitely going to have dumplings. We are probably going to have a roast duck, but maybe not Peking duck. It will be just a roast duck rather than the strictly speaking crispy Peking duck. I'm gonna the wines I will be having is this one, Cabernet Grenache.
Very nice.
And also I don't have the bottle here, but actually I do. So this is from Shandong province, which we've had last year. The Syrah from Shandong province, and I have a bottle of ice wine from Changyu, but they make it in Liaoning province, in the north of China. So I've got those 3 wines lined up. So I'm looking forward to having all Chinese wines for Chinese New Year. So,
I was reading about the most popular dumpling in the paper on yesterday for Chinese New Year was pork and cabbage. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that is correct. That's the most classic filling, right?
Dumpling, yeah.
猪肉大白菜. Yeah, that's the most. That's classic. Yes.
Yeah. So this is a very good Chinese New Year special. So it's been over a year since we last been able to go back to China, really. Yeah. The Chinese cuisines, dishes, and some nice wine pairings, really gearing us up for next week for the Chinese New Year atmosphere.
Yes, exactly.
Great. Thank you, Janet, for the wine talk. Thank you, everybody, again for joining us. And we wish everybody a very happy, healthy, a very bullish the year of Ox.
Yes.
And in 2 weeks' time, on the 21st February, our wine talk will be about what the Chinese wine industry tell us about modern China. So it's more a bigger topic next week. See you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, everybody. Happy Chinese.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, everybody.
Bobby.
Nice
Thank
to
you,
see you.
Duncan.
Yeah.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
All right.
Happy Chinese.
Cheers. Have a good evening.
Yeah, you as well.
Thank
All right.
you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.